Okay, thank you very much, John. So, for those of you who didn't come across me in the last session, my name is John Byers and I'm the head of machine learning and artificial intelligence at Osborne Clarke, which is an international law firm. So I'm an AI attorney. I advise businesses on all things artificial intelligence, regulatory, transactional, governance issues as well. Today we're going to be looking at how to lawfully implement automated facial recognition in retail from a regulatory perspective. What I'm going to try and do in a very short slot that I've got, 20 minutes, forgive me if I'm kind of rattling through the content, is lead you through the current regulatory environment. And I've tried to make my slides as full as possible. I think they're available to you as delegates, so you can actually refer back to them at your leisure. So we'll cover what automated facial recognition is. We'll look at some computer vision and some AFR or facial recognition use cases. Then we'll touch on wider context. And then I'm going to lead you through existing database regulation that applies to database regulation that applies to automated facial recognition and emergent AI regulation, which you need to be mindful of. And if we've got time, we'll touch on some cases at the end. That depends on John by the door there. Gives me that indulgence. So, what is automated facial recognition? Well, I see it as applied machine learning. Essentially, it's a machine learning system that's connected to a capture device, and it could actually be live, or it could be querying a database of facial images. So that animation on the left doesn't really work properly on that projector, but that's supposed to be a black box. And what are the key conceptual issues from a regulatory and legal perspective you need to be mindful of with automated facial recognition and machine learning? Well, transparency issue is the first one. If you're using a black box system, that creates all sorts of problems from a legal perspective, because even though data scientists know how to construct a machine learning framework, they don't understand yet how or why a machine learning system can come to a given solution in a particular circumstance. That is something for deep neural networks that's not possible yet. Then you've got the autonomy issue, which is the way in which machine learning systems learn as opposed to traditional computer systems. So you basically feed a machine learning system a data set, goes through a training process, and it comes up with a variable decision which is very similar to the kind of decision you would make as a human being, and that's the bell curve at the bottom there. You make a decision which is in the bounds of reasonable probability. Some decisions are more reasonable than others. Some decisions sit at the edge of that reasonable probability, and they're called edge case decisions, or corner decisions, and they're very much a feature of machine learning systems. They're not faults, they just cause machine learning systems do odd things. So that's when the Tesla drives into a white semi because it thinks that it's sky and kills the driver. That's an edge case decision. And finally, so far as facial recognition is concerned, it needs to consume data. As a machine learning system, it needs to consume data. And that's invariably biometric data, it's facial data. Facial data, biometric data acquisition has its own set of regulatory problems, as we'll see in a minute. Quick skirt through some computer vision use cases, customer demographics, retail behaviour tracking. You have a facial recognition system in the store that looks at who's coming in and what they're doing in the store. Crime prevention and surveillance, making certain that stock isn't stolen. Smart advertising, you walk up to a billboard in the store and it looks at you, assesses what your demographic actually is, and tries to set up adverts that it thinks are suitable for you. We've been working on solutions like that. Obviously, the cashless retail situation, which is the Amazon Walk and Go. You go into an Amazon store, it recognises you, you can take the stock out without actually going through a physical cash register. And the last one is more computer vision, but that's counterfeit identification. Or damage identification. I went through a similar process a few days ago in an Apple store, changing my iPhone. Apple now use computer vision to check your trade-in phone in store. They put another iPhone over it, and the computer vision checks to make certain the phone is not damaged. Not the store assistant. The algorithm does that now. So what's the wider context of automated facial recognition? Why do you need to be very careful about it? Well, I think I'm going to be stating the obvious when I say that there is a deep public unease about the widespread use of automated facial recognition and artificial intelligence generally. And this is fueled lots and lots of negative headlines. The New York Times one at the bottom is actually relates to Clearview AI, who spoke this morning. And this has led to civil liberties organisations becoming very active, and of course politicians and legislators have responded to that and started creating laws to regulate the use of data and artificial intelligence. And as a provider of an automated facial recognition system, or a retail purchaser of an automated facial recognition system, you need to be really mindful of the negative reputational impact if you get it wrong. The headline on the top right is a UK supermarket, a major supermarket where got it wrong, and it's been absolutely castigated in the UK press as a result. It's very, very damaging if you get it wrong. So that's the context. What's happening on the regulatory front? Well, as you can see, there's lots. The black laws are actually enforced at the moment. So in the United States, we've obviously got BIPA, which is the Biometric Information Privacy Act, which has been around since 2008. Texas has a Biometric Acquisition Act. California obviously has the CCPA, and the CCPA is going to be enhanced and upgraded. So the red is the new stuff to the CPRA, which is going to align it much more to the GDPR. The GIA is about to pass a law, and Colorado is as well, as put on that slide. And there's a draft federal Data Protection Act sitting in Congress at the moment, which would align the US much more to the GDPR, if that gets through Congress. Canada obviously has PIPEDA, which is their version of the Data Protection Act, and they are also passing a draft Artificial Intelligence Act. The EU has the GDPR, and has a draft Artificial Intelligence Act, and the UK also has the GDPR, but it is no longer part of Europe, different approach to artificial intelligence regulation. You can see all of those economies are very, very active in regulating both data and artificial intelligence systems. So one of the things you need to be thinking about with your automated facial recognition system when you're implementing it, well, there are two themes. The first is data regulation, as we've seen the themes that are enforced now, and then the emergent themes which relate to artificial intelligence regulation. And with data, we're going to have a quick look at biometric data capture, how you can lawfully gain the facial images, automated decision-making and processing, and the concept of impact assessments. And with AI, the themes that are coming through are all about your data sets, making certain that they're verifiable, you understand the provenance, you understand where they come from, they're demographically appropriate for your particular use case. Transparency, the model that you use, and accuracy and robustness. So biometric data is the first major hurdle that you need to think about when you're rolling out automated facial recognition. And in many jurisdictions, in most jurisdictions, explicit consent is required to acquire that biometric data. And I've got extra, I'm not going to read them out, but I've got extracts from the GDPR in Europe, Illinois' BIPA, and California's CCPA. And they're all virtually aligned. Explicit consent is needed. So, in the issue of biometric data capture, what's the first thing you need to be thinking about practically? You need to understand what your use case is going to be for the AFR system, which will be highly context specific. And really, you need to work out whether you absolutely need to capture biometric data, because that's the first one. In some cases, you can get around implementing a system without capturing biometric data. If you can manage that, then you save yourself a world of regulatory pain. And I'll give you some examples. So if you're focusing on a system that was looking at footfall demographics in your store, You could use point cloud detection, which is very similar to the Microsoft Connect motion detection system, which wouldn't be acquiring biometric data. If you needed a use case that was distinguishing between store staff and customers, you could think about implementing uniform detection, which is not biometric data. Or you could think about implementing gesture recognition. So someone waving or thumbs up, which again is not capturing biometric data. So you need to think innovatively. Do you absolutely need to capture biometric information for your use case? But obviously, we talked about consent, and this is the lawful basis for biometric data capture. That's something that you'll need to establish when you're rolling out your system. But there is an issue with direct consent, automated facial recognition. As I said earlier, AFR can be part of an active CCTV system which is live, which is doing matches and fails live, or querying pre-existing facial database such as Amazon recognition. The problem is, how do you lawfully get consent from someone to live AFR when the system has already instantaneously captured their face? So if they walk into a store, their face has been processed before there's an opportunity to actually get their consent. Yeah? And that's a real regulatory issue with these types of systems. How do you manage that? Even if you're not, if you walk into an Amazon store and you're not an Amazon customer, the system's still scanning your face to see whether or not you are an Amazon customer, so it's processing the biometric data. There are some practical suggestions. Some of these are probably less practical than others. You could consider structuring an in-store AFR system so that it is in a confined ring-fenced area, and you need to seek consent of the customers before they go to that ring-fenced area. Or you provide a concierge area at the entrance to the store, and you get consent at that particular point in time. Or you can adopt the Amazon Go model, which has the customers pre-registered on an Amazon app. And then the app permits entry to the store, and then the terms and conditions that they sign provide the consent to the automated facial recognition. There's a little trap here as well, though, which is that the entry to the store needs to be non-biometric. Because if they're using biometrics to gain entry to the store, then they've breached regulation. So they need to have something like a QR code or something, a secondary system to gain access to the store. If they don't do that, it's unlawful. Next issue is automated decision-making and profiling. This is the situation where the machine is making a decision about whether or not to allow access to the store, or in a wider sense, it could be any decision that's made by the machine without a human in the loop. And this is something you'll need to assess in relation to your particular use case. Automated processing needs explicit consent. So what are the practical suggestions here? Well, you need to understand how your system is making automated decisions. And you need to work out what the risk impact is to determine the appropriate mitigations. Basically, actually, you need to insert a human in the loop to make, to moderate that machine's decision. And that human in the loop should have the power to review all of the decisions of the system, and it should be meaningful, not just taken by the stand. There are two threats to that. One is automation bias, and that's essentially a situation where, because you're dealing with a computer and you trust it, you give up, and you're not prepared to challenge that decision. In that case, that becomes an automated decision. And then model interpretability is another challenge to automated decision making. If you don't understand how the system's come to its conclusion, you may end up not challenging it, and that could also mean that it's effectively an automated decision. So impact assessments. Now these are things that are required by many laws, including the CPRA and the EU and UK GDPR. These are exercises that you undertake to determine your use case, mitigations, and to establish that your use of the AFR is proportionate. And what you're doing there is undertaking a balancing act between the rights of the individual and the needs of your enterprise. practical suggestions for impact assessments? Well, again, challenge whether or not you really do need to use automated facial recognition. You do need to understand reasonable expectations of customers that come into your store. If you're capturing biometric information or you're using automated decision making, that creates a higher standard in terms of your impact assessment. Mitigations need to be stronger. What kind of steps, practical steps can you take? Well, you can put prominent in-store signage into your stores, explaining that there's automated facial recognition there. Camera sighting and positioning is absolutely critical. The worst thing you can do is put a camera in your store that's pointing out to the street. So what you're doing there is capturing people that are outside the store in the street scene outside. So you're automatically breaching data legislation by doing that. So when you position cameras, you need to make certain that they're appropriate for the use case that you've determined. You need to work out what your minimal storage and retention periods are, and have a mechanism to extract or delete data where people say they don't want their biometric data to be processed by your system. And obviously keep humans in the loop. So that was all the existing legislation. And now we're moving to the kind of the new brave new world of AI regulation. And this is focusing increasingly on models and data sets. And in the context of automated facial recognition, this is obviously the facial database that powers your AFR system. And the new draft European Act requires your data sets to be demographically appropriate to the use case. This is really quite a big deal, because if you have a store in, say, a predominantly Hispanic area, and you install an AFR system that's been trained on white Caucasian faces, that's a breach of that requirement. This is not demographically appropriate. So you can see the level of analysis you need to undertake, certainly at that measure, and the rumour is that Canadian law is going to be very similar to ethically and legally roll out the automated facial recognition system. Data sets need to be subject to appropriate data governance processes, which means that on an ongoing basis, if biases are shown up or thrown up by the use of the system, you need to have a mechanism to remedy that in your AFR system. And don't forget the earlier discussion we had about consent. You still need to get the consent of the people that are involved in the facial database. And something that our friends at KU didn't do. So what are the practical suggestions? Well, unfortunately, simply buying in a third-party AFR system without questioning the provenance of the data set is not going to be enough, certainly not under the new EU Artificial Intelligence Act. As part of the impact assessment process, you need to understand where the data sets that power your automated facial recognition come from. Are they demographically appropriate? What's the mix of races in that and genders in that facial database? And you need to, again, have those documented governance mechanisms that we talked about in relation to adjusting bias and inaccuracy in the data set. I'm going to whiz through this now because I've been told that we've got very little time left, but the EU AIA also requires that the system should be transparent, which means that you need to be include comprehensive instructions, show how it works, what the human oversight process is, and the Cannabis Act is going to have this exactly the same requirement. Skip through that. And it needs to be accurate and robust. It needs to be consistent in operation. You need to be able to address and remedy biases and outputs, and you need to ensure that systems are hardened to cybersecurity attacks. These are all in the relevant draft legislation. For accuracy and robustness, it's a machine learning system that is deep neural network. The only way that you can be serviced by empirical testing in this. So if you are a developer, you need to undertake comprehensive tests of the system and publish them to your customers so you can verify that the system is accurate. If you're buying from a third party, you need to see those tests. It's not an option to get these blind. And finally, one salutary lesson which gives life to all of this is a US case about a company called Everalbum, which is an FTC case, January 2021. Everalbum was an app service which took facial data on an iPhone app. They failed to get the consent of the consumers to their biometric facial data. They also retained it when their customers had asked them to delete it. The FTC basically told them that they needed to delete all of that data. And not only that, they needed to unwind the model that had been trained on the offending data. This is probably going to strike terror into the hearts of someone who's kind of developing a facial recognition model at the moment. But that goes, ironically, that's a US case, and that goes far beyond what the European Union has done. And then, unsurprisingly, since then, Ever has shut down Osborne Clarke. So there you go. Sorry, we've got a bit rushed towards the end. But if you want to know more, listen to more of my publications. And I'm coming around this afternoon, so if you have any questions on governance and regulation related to artificial intelligence and automated facial recognition,